Meghan's master plan, exposed after King Charles III peace talks revealed. There was a time when the name Harry brought to mind a smiling young prince, walking beside his brother William, hand in hand with their mother, Diana. Many Americans, especially those of us old enough to remember her radiant presence, still feel a quiet, lingering affection for that little boy whose heart was shattered far too soon. But in recent years, Prince Harry has become a figure caught in the fog of controversy, leaving many to wonder, what happened to the young man we rooted for? Now, amid whispers of possible reconciliation between Harry and his father, King Charles III, a new layer has emerged. A suggestion that these so-called peace talks are not simply a father and son trying to mend what's been broken, but perhaps part of a broader, more strategic effort orchestrated by Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. For those of us who've lived long enough to have seen public figures rise, fall, and rise again, this sort of calculated behind-the-scenes maneuvering is not new. But when it involves a family so steeped in tradition, duty, and public scrutiny, the implications are harder to ignore. Reports have surfaced that last week, in the heart of London, Prince Harry's communications team held a quiet, off-the-record meeting with representatives close to the king. No palace statements were made. No official photos were released. But the timing, and secrecy, raised eyebrows. Some called it a peace summit, a hopeful moment that perhaps, after all that's happened, father and son could find their way back to each other. Yet others, particularly those who've observed the royal family with both warmth and a healthy dose of skepticism, are not so convinced this is all about family healing. Valentine Low, a seasoned royal correspondent with years of palace reporting under his belt, was blunt in his assessment. He noted that if these meetings lead to reconciliation, the biggest beneficiary might not be the king or Harry, but Meghan. According to him, if the royal family were to welcome the Sussexes back into the fold, or even just soften their public stance, it could go a long way in repairing Meghan's somewhat frayed reputation, particularly in the UK press. That, in turn, could be a boon to her expanding personal brand. You see, many royal watchers believe Meghan is someone who plays the long game. She's not impulsive, nor is she naive. She's organized, deliberate, and, like many American women who've had to navigate powerful, established systems, she's strategic. This has earned her both admiration and criticism. To some, she's a trailblazer who refused to conform to outdated norms. To others, she's seen as someone who disrupted a delicate family dynamic and walked away when things didn't go her way. But whatever side of that debate you fall on, what's becoming increasingly clear is that Meghan is far from passive in this unfolding narrative. Broadcaster Sarah Hewson put it plainly. Meghan, she said, has a game plan. And in that plan, Harry plays a central role. Not as a silent partner, perhaps, but as someone who often looks to Meghan for direction. The two have weathered an enormous amount together, media storms, royal fallout, family estrangements, but for many observers, it's Harry who seems more adrift. Meghan, with her growing list of business ventures and public appearances, seems to have found her footing. Harry, on the other hand, reportedly appears increasingly isolated, living in Montecito, far from both his British roots and any clear professional path. It's a painful observation to make about someone who, not so long ago, was one of the world's most beloved figures. But for those of us who've experienced the winding roads of life, we know that even those born into privilege are not immune to feeling lost. And perhaps that's where King Charles III comes in. The king, now facing his own health concerns, may be extending a hand, not as monarch to subject, but as father to son. And if that hand is being guided, even partially, by a desire to preserve the legacy of the crown and protect what's left of familial trust, then maybe it's not such a cynical move after all. Still, trust is a fragile thing. Hewson emphasized this when she spoke about the challenges that still exist. For any real reconciliation to take root, it must begin with a one-on-one conversation between Harry and his father. No aides, no press releases, just two men, each carrying the weight of their roles, and the heaviness of a relationship that's been strained by years of pain and public fallout. For Americans, especially older generations who value family ties and quiet dignity, this image resonates. Many of us have lived long enough to know that grudges are easy, but reconciliation requires courage. There's also the matter of what's at stake. Harry's upcoming visit to the UK this September for the Well Child Awards has taken on new significance. It could mark the first time he and King Charles meet in person in more than a year. That's not just a royal scheduling note. It's a potential inflection point. A chance for healing. Or, at the very least, a moment of acknowledgement. And perhaps that's what so many of us are hoping for, not some grand public reunion, but the quiet dignity of two people trying to find each other again. Of course, some will continue to question Meghan's role in all this. Her critics accuse her of orchestrating every move. Her supporters see her as a woman trying to protect her family and redefine her life. But in either case, the spotlight remains fixed on her. In the world of royalty, and fame in general, there's always someone pulling the strings. But the true test, as any parent or grandparent knows, is whether hearts can be softened. Whether time can truly heal. If reconciliation does happen, it won't erase the past. The interviews, the memoirs, the public statements, all of that still lingers in the public's memory. But it could mark a turning point. And for many of us who've watched this story unfold over the decades, from Diana's radiant smile to the solemn walk behind her casket, from weddings to bombshell interviews, the idea of peace, even partial peace, within the royal family carries more meaning than headlines can capture. In the end, this isn't just a story about royalty. It's a story about family. About how even those with castles and crowns must still wrestle with forgiveness, legacy, and the desire to belong. It's a story older Americans understand deeply, because it echoes truths we've seen in our own lives: estrangements that stretched too long, reconciliations that came just in time, and the bittersweet knowledge that life is too short to stay angry. So as the headlines swirl and commentators weigh in, perhaps the most important voices are not those on the news channels, but those in living rooms across the country, where mothers, fathers, and grandparents quietly hope that this family, like so many others, can find its way back, not just for the cameras but for themselves. And maybe that's the heart of it all, the reminder that no matter how vast the ocean between them, no matter how loud the tabloids, how complicated the politics of crown and country, the bonds of blood and shared memory are never fully severed. A father still thinks of his son, especially as age creeps in and health becomes uncertain. A son still remembers the comfort of his father's hand on his shoulder, or the sound of his voice during quieter times. These aren't things fame can erase. They linger, quietly, in the space between what's said and what's felt. For those of us in our later years, who've seen relationships fracture and, if we're lucky, heal, this story carries an echo of our own journeys. The world may see crowns and controversies, but we see a family trying, perhaps clumsily, to come home to itself. Maybe Harry and Charles will find common ground, even if just a few words spoken in honesty. And maybe, just maybe, the young man we once watched walk behind his mother's casket will find the peace she always hoped he'd have.